Next, we'll go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for coming today. A recent article said, Canadian Army says new military sleeping bags are not suitable for typical Canadian winter. And Rob Hubert, an Arctic expert, said, I wonder if they should have just gone to Canadian Tire. The Defense Department spent more than $34.8 million on 55,000 sleeping bags. From the article, troops who had used the recently issued general purpose sleeping bag system late last fall in a preparatory exercise found several critical issues. Temperatures during the deployment ranged from -5 degrees Celsius during the day to -20 degrees Celsius at night, hardly harsh conditions in the Canadian winter or north. The critical issues discovered by the soldiers related to a lack of warmth from the new GP
Point of
SBS.
order, Mr. Chair.
I'm pausing the time here. Point of order, Mr. Carr.
Although I deeply respect that my colleague is asking important questions that pertain to the men and women in our armed forces, last time I checked, this is not the Committee for National Defense, nor is there anything in the motion related to relevance on this topic. Perhaps our colleague can be reminded, Mr. Chair, of why we're here. He should know that because the 18 hours that we're sitting was forced upon us by them. So perhaps he can get back to the topic at hand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. We do provide a fairly wide range of latitude here, but I do want to remind members to make sure they're sticking with the matter at hand here as well. I did stop the time for Mr. Zimmer. You have a little bit more than 4 minutes.
The critical issues discovered by the soldiers related to a lack of warmth with the new GPSBS, said the briefing note written on December 5th, 2023. Why would you buy 55,000 sleeping bags for $34.8 million that don't work in our Canadian North or the Arctic?
Je pense que la réponse a déjà été suggérée par.
I think the answer was already suggested by my colleague, MP Ben Carr. You have the right to ask a question. You also have the right to have the right person to answer, and that would be Minister Blair.
Minister, but actually it's your department that's in charge of procurement and procurement of military-issued materials. I have in my order paper question that we asked for this September. It was given to your department. You answered us. That tells me that was your department that was responsible.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, point of order for Mr. Carr.
I'm seeking your guidance. I understand, as a chair as well, that we can give a generous amount of latitude. Can Mr. Zimmer, and if not you, please provide some explanation as to how anything in the order that the House passed here in relation to the question that he is currently asking in relation to the procurement of military supplies is connected. If not, Mr. Chair, then I will yet again intervene with a point of order to ask for further guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. And certainly the study that we're doing today is an update to the barriers to economic development in Indigenous communities. I was giving a fairly wide latitude to Mr. Zimmer in hopes that his line of questioning would circulate to the matter at hand. And so I do just want to remind members to stick to the topic at hand, and that indeed that we have been ordered by the House to do this study on. So with that, I'll turn the floor back to Mr. Zimmer. You have a little bit more than 3 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll get back to my question. Again, the question went to your ministry minister about, and you sent back as an answer, you said this adaptability makes the sleeping bag suitable for diverse operational environments, including but not limited to Arctic conditions. So once again, it was your department that procured these sleeping bags that don't work, and it does relate to what this committee is here about, and it's about Arctic sovereignty and about our north.
Point of order for Mr. Hanley.
With respect and in follow-up to my colleague, Mr. Carr, I'm failing to see the relevance of this question to the subject at hand, barriers to economic development in Indigenous communities.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. And again, I also don't see the relevance of this to the study at hand. We do have some very significant issues we need to be, I would suggest we should be spending this time on barriers to Indigenous economic development and the procurement. I know there's been many very relevant questions that have been asked today, and I'll just remind members to be sure to stick to the topic at hand so that we can get those answers. Mr. Zimmer.
Yes, and I represent as Shadow Minister for Northern Affairs and Arctic Sovereignty, Northerners and Inuit across the three territories. And one thing that's very much a concern to people in the north is Arctic sovereignty and security. And equipment like this, it's procured and needed for our Arctic sovereignty, for their Arctic sovereignty, protection of that Arctic sovereignty is necessary. And this, I know this government doesn't want to talk about.
Mr. Chair, that's debate.
I know this government
debate,
is
Mr.
speaking
Chair.
to the point of order.
Mr. Chair, it's debate.
Well, that's fine. Then let's get back after it then. Is that fine?
So long as it's relevant, Mr. Zimmer.
Mr. Zimmer, I'm going to hand the floor back to you. You have about a little bit more than 2.5 minutes at this point, so please do your best to stick to the topic at hand here. We did do a very robust study on the north, and we did have the committee did actually visit a number of communities in the north where we studied these topics. I think that would have been a very appropriate time to bring up those topics, but I don't see the relevance to the matter at hand today. But I do want to give the opportunity in the 2.5 minutes that you have at this point to return to that.
So thank you. We'll get back to it once again. And you're the procurement minister, are you not? Yes or no?
That's an easy question to answer. Yes, I'm there
Yes, you are.
to
So
help
let's
you.
get back to it. So there's a project called the Polar Icebreaker Project, and there was a 2024 update by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. How much is the Polar Icebreaker Project projected to cost now, Minister?
I'll answer this question, although I know that some others might want to ask why we're not investing our time and energy on supporting Indigenous businesses' access to
It's a very
federal
important
procurement,
topic,
which is so
Minister. So I wish-
important
can
for
you-
economic and
can you
social
just answer the
development of those workers, of those businesses, and those communities.
Point of
This is a
order, Mr.
rare instance, and I think a very precious one, in which we
Point of order,
can
Mr. Speaker.
all gather our.
Yeah, it's a
Zimmer.
real simple question. He said he had it. It sounded like he had read the report. A simple answer is how much is the project costing to date? And
It's not a point of order, but on the same point of
Yeah.
order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carr, on the same non-point of order.
Well, if it's going to be recognized, sure. Mr. Chair, again, Mr. Zimmer is not talking about anything that is relevant to the debate at hand. It was Conservative members, along with the NDP and the Bloc, that sent us back here to talk about Indigenous economic development and barriers to it. He has not used the word Indigenous in the last 4 minutes in anything related to the question that he has posed to the minister. So, Chair, it is your prerogative to remove the floor from a member who is not staying, yes it is, who is not staying relevant to a debate. My colleague may be mistaken, but that is in fact the case. I would ask now for the 5th time, Mr. Chair, if he wants Minister Blair in that seat to answer questions about military procurement, then he can go to the Defense Committee and do so. It's insulting that we have been asked to talk about Indigenous issues, and he hasn't used the word Indigenous to ask a question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. And again, I do want to remind members to stick to the matter at hand. There is a certain amount of chair's prerogative on these things, and I want to give Mr. Zimmer another chance to ask one of those very, very relevant questions. And I know we have many questions that we want to get answered to that are maybe outside the scope of this study. But again, we're here to do, in addition to the barriers to the economic development in Indigenous communities, as has been ordered by the House. And so Mr. Zimmer, I will give you the floor once more, but if it's not going to be relevant to the study at hand, then we are going to be moving on to another member.
a point of order, Mr. Chair. What I'm speaking about, how it affects northern communities and Arctic sovereignty, and that does involve Indigenous communities directly. And if the member doesn't understand that, then maybe he should visit some northern communities so he can further understand how concerned they are about the lack of activity this Liberal government's doing on Arctic sovereignty and security. So maybe he wants to go talk to some northern communities and ask them about these questions. Can I get back to my question?
Point of order,
Chair?
Mr. Chair.
You will have the floor here for another 2 minutes or less. But again, there are many ways to frame this question that would make it relevant for this study, and I would just invite you to do that. But I will turn the floor back to you. But first, I see that Mr. Hanley has a point of order.
Yes, I do. I would suggest that my friend Mr. Zimmer is engaging in debate rather than addressing a point of order, which is really about Indigenous procurement. Again, the topic is Indigenous procurement, not Indigenous as some kind of broad anything goes topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Zimmer, I'll hand the floor back to you.
Thank you. And what we're here today is really talking about how this NDP Liberal government and its scandal around procurement, and specifically around Indigenous procurement. And I'm asking you a question about how much the icebreakers are costing, and it's all very relevant because it involves the North. So please, what are the polar icebreaker project that was supposed to cost $720 million announced by a previous Conservative government? What's the cost balloon to date, Minister?
Well, two pieces of good news here. The first one is that you're a member of Parliament of a riding where I think there are 13 First Nations communities. So it's good that we have this opportunity here to speak about Indigenous business procurement.
So the actual cost of the acquisition of those two polar icebreakers has ballooned to an estimated $8.5 billion. And I think what's concerning to Northerners...
Point of order.
Point of order,
relevance
Ms.
here.
Gainey.
Just getting there. If you would have waited 2 seconds. Yeah.
The relevance here is
Still
is
talking
way
about
off.
Northern issues, Indigenous.
We are not talking about northern issues. We're talking about the motion that was put before the House, which is why we're here.
Thank you, Ms. Gainey. Again, I'm not seeing how this is relevant at all to the study at hand. If it would be useful, I'd be happy to circulate the motion again. The study at hand is, again, about Indigenous economic procurement and barriers to Indigenous economic development that we're dealing with today. So, again, Mr. Zimmer, we've been through this now through many points of orders. I don't want to keep...
One last comment, then we'll move on.
I will give you the floor for one last comment, and then we're going to move on to the next questioner.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And I know, the NDP Liberals, whether it's you, Minister, or the panel across the way, doesn't want to answer these questions that really matter to Northerners and to our Arctic sovereignty. I understand that. You're wrapped up deep in scandal. You want to change the channel. I understand it's unfortunate. As Minister, you're refusing to answer my questions today at committee. Thank you.
A great question we should be answering too, MP Zimmer, is how we would be supportive of your 13 First Nations communities in accessing federal procurement activities like the McLeod Lake First Nation, the Dog River First Nation, the Blueberry Rivers First Nations, and many others which are all located in your riding. So it would be great if we could spend time together within this particular setting to support the Indigenous businesses in your First Nations communities.
Very much, Mr. Zimmer.